I'm Bernadette Phelan. I head up advisory services and business in the community. So I have the joy of hosting our panel discussion this morning. We're going to, unsurprisingly, talk about different leadership perspectives on the critical dimensions of sustainability. You'll hear how governance structure impacts on what's important and the scope of sustainability. We'll touch on how business models across 3 different sectors are being changed and driving, again, that opportunity framing, looking how innovation has been driven by sustainability. What I hope, what you hear, though, is a normal business conversation. I don't want this, and I don't think it won't be, a niche sustainability conversation, because sustainability isn't niche. It's not niche to government. It's not niche to you in your business. And again, that KPMG report that was issued recently was saying, again, the attraction of talent for the next generation. I think it was 43% of you were saying that that is what is really critical. So this really matters. Another EY report, actually, from last year as part of their antithesis project, they stated that sustainability is not an industry, it's not an activity, it's not a theme. Back to the fact, it's a specific point in time when an economic activity is operating within sustainable limits. And I'm hoping that's the framing you'll hear within our discussion today. Because again, while we can't pick up a newspaper without talking about sustainability, the metrics show we're not delivering action at scale and speed to actually move the dial on the fact that 80% of EU habitats are classified as being in a poor condition. The language and statements coming out of the UN about the Sustainable Development Goals and that scorecard is, they were sounding the alarm, is what they said. You cannot get any starker a statement than that. So we are at a critical juncture, and the forces against action are high. An Accenture Global Compact study from September, 43% of global CEOs said that their sustainability efforts were being hampered by geopolitical events. And again, the narrative even nationally is you see it's environment versus the cost of living crisis. It's urban versus rural. It's those of us with pensions that are secure versus those that are renting and don't even have a pension. But it's very divisive. And again, I think the risk of this being politicized as an issue is a huge risk that we face. So that leadership piece is very real and tangible in the work that we do within business and the community. So within that context, I'm going to invite our panel to join me on stage. We have Stephen Garvey from Glenveagh, Deborah Threadgold from IBM, and Noel Keeley from Musgrave. I know we're going to run out of time, so I'm sure I'll have to really interrupt you while you're mid-flow, but I know we're going to have a really great conversation and hopefully leave you with some insights, but also essentially feeling energized, and the hope part I think is really important. So Noel, actually, I'm going to start with yourself. A lot of disruptors hitting your sector. Which ones are most concern for you in terms of what's happening in Musgraves?
I suppose we look at the whole sustainability question from 2 perspectives. One is the sustainability of our business. We're a 6th-generation family-owned business, and the family's wish is that the business is handed on to the next generation in better shape than they've had the privilege to receive it. But part of that, obviously, then is the broader sustainability agenda. And we've been investing heavily in sustainability. I was struck by some of the things that Ruth said around moving away from this notion of it being a compliance problem, and actually thinking about, how can you make this commercially successful, because there's money in it, as you've heard. But the second thing is, I think the challenge of it feeling so complicated, and everybody is feeling that it's almost like a Rubik's Cube that you can't solve. And I think it's incumbent upon business to begin to look at how we do that within each of our sectors. So if I look at the food supply chain, we've signed up to be net zero by 2040 as a business, but 96% of our emissions are scope 3. So even if we hit our target, it's a spit in the ocean. And the reality of it is the whole supply chain has to come together and have this conversation. Politicians aren't aren't going to do this because they need to get re-elected every 5 years, and I think there's a real opportunity for business to step up to the plate.
Okay. And I know Scope 3 is a common challenge across many of the sectors.
It's a huge challenge, and I mean, it's simply not going to be solved without the whole supply chain coming together. And if we don't look at it in that way, we're not going to solve the problem, because the reality of it is everybody's going to have a different view in terms of how they're going to look at solving it for themselves. But unless collectively we work to figure it out, and we can transition. I mean, I think that's an interesting word. I believe that this transition is completely doable, and it's commercially sensible to do it as well. Because at the end of the day, if we don't do it, all the money in the world isn't going to matter, because we won't have anywhere to live.
And speaking of places to live, Stephen, I'll come to you, and I know we will be talking about the supply chain aspects of your business, but probably picking up on the investment thread, and as the PLC on the stage you IPO'd in 2017. So, the vision of Glenveagh is particularly, I think, the affordable and the sustainable home. Sure. So how is it going?
Yeah, I suppose we're in two eyes of the storm, because there is a climate crisis that is upon us, and we've got to address that, and then we're in a housing crisis as well. So it's folded into two. And I think if you look at all reports, and the Western world has a phenomenal problem, like Ireland has a problem with housing, but the Western world now has a problem with housing and affordability and being able to deliver housing. For us, I think the ways we looked upon it is, and Ruth kind of pointed this out, the capital had to be attracted, so you had to have a vision of what you wanted to do. You had to clearly outline why you wanted to do this. We had to reduce the carbon in how we produce our product, and that Scope 3 is the real big challenge, how we're going to do that, and how we sell that vision. We had to reduce the cost, because affordability is a big issue for people as well. And combine all those, and I suppose the other big thing is capacity. How many people have we there to do this? And I suppose they're all the challenges that we face. But as Ruth outlined, it is a huge opportunity as well. The biggest thing you're trying to position is, there's two things you've got to bring. You've got to bring the capital with you, but you've also got to bring the people with you. You've got to bring your own people with you, but you've also to bring your customer with you. Yeah. And I think the ways we tried to pitch it was, we very much decided, regulations on how we were building our homes. We had to comply with A2 or A3. We decided to go for A1. So every new home we build is now A1 homes. And we personally made that decision, or internally made that decision. And the ways we tried to pitch it to our customer was, it was ironic the ways utility costs went in 2022 or 2023. We had delivered homes that were really energy efficient. We were able to say, now look at the benefits. You're getting 50% reduction. And to a degree, we kind of made the transition to that. Our customer bought into that. And why they're attracted to what we do now is they actually see the benefits of that, and bringing the people, which is key. On the institutional side, I suppose there's two aspects we've seen is, there's an element of the majority of capital is in America, and trying to get that capital to come here is a key issue. Mm-hmm. And there is issues in, America's on, it's a 50-50 split what way they want to go. And what we've kind of got to do is keep attracting, keep that vision, keep saying this is where we want to go, this is how we want to do it. And it's that sustainability of the business. It's in 10 years' time or 15 years' time or 20, you can have a sustainable business that can produce affordable housing for people, because that's what we need. And it's trying to attract that. There is challenges out there. You're dealing with the cost of capital for every institution has changed in the last number of months. Mm-hmm. The money markets are competing with the bond market, and that demand out there, and there's a less capital, so you've really got to make clear what you're trying to do, why you're doing it, and this is the best space. I always kind of the view is the customer will lead this, and if you can get your customer to buy into this, the money will follow you.
Thank you, Stephen. And Deborah, you live in the Irish world for a US company, a company that's around since, 1911, in Ireland since 1956. And I think technology, you're going to be the saviour, and also part of the scary part of the changes. So what's top of mind for IBM at the moment?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, Bernadette. And just to start, just to say from an IBM perspective, obviously we're talking about technology, or I'm talking about technology this morning. So having a very strong stance on the ethical side and responsible technology is really important as we come on to talking about how some of the technologies are going to help us as businesses as we deal with all these challenges. But likewise, I mean, from a sustainability perspective, you know, we produced our first policy back over 50 years ago. We report every year and have done since 1990, and we've 21 sustainability goals and a whole team of people who work around that. But I think what's interesting is to hear what clients are saying. So we carried out a survey earlier this year with 3,000 CEOs across multiple industries across the world. And of course they said that they have a huge focus on sustainability. About 53% said it's a top priority for them. And 63% said that they are going to be relying on digital capabilities and AI to help them to actually get to their goals. But only 35%, and I think we heard this earlier on the PwC report, are actually really delivering against those goals. And the two big reasons that organisations gave us is that they don't necessarily understand the return on investment against some of their sustainability goals. But also, we've just mentioned about Scope 3 emissions. There's a real challenge as well around how do you gather that data because it's down there in your supply chain. So they're the real challenges that we're facing. I mean, as an IBM organisation, we have set ourselves net zero by 2030 without carbon offsets, but we have to make some tough decisions as well. So when we're purchasing, for example, renewable certificates, we're very careful, whether it's wind or solar, that we are buying only in the grid region where we're actually utilising and consuming the electricity. So just to give you an example of what that means for the business, you know, $20 a certificate in New York for all of our locations in New York is millions of dollars for the IBM Corporation, as opposed to buying $2 certificates from Texas. And likewise, here in Ireland, we're very careful not to be buying cheaper Scandinavian certificates, but actually everything is from Irish renewable sources as well. But yes, technology is going to have a huge role to play, and it does already actually, because talking about the Scope 1 and the Scope 2 emissions, there's plenty of technology tools out there, including our own, that help you to report those, because that's a real challenge. But the Scope 3, there's good news coming, because with the introduction, of course, of generative AI, and we've all been talking about generative AI this year, we're actually in a position where we are building foundational models, and they have the capability for us to train those models to gather huge amounts of that data that we wouldn't ordinarily own and access a carbon emission assigned number, so to speak, in terms of how we report that against our goals. And just as a matter of interest, because return on investment is really important, the research that we've done around actually applying tools like BITCI with generative AI built into it, to gather that data would typically take about 4 months for an organisation. It now does it in 1 hour. So that technology is absolutely imminent. And then there's emerging technology. So we have the likes of quantum computing coming our way. And this is an area where we need to make a lot of investment. And that's a comment for Ireland Inc. as well here. Quantum computing is so powerful that it has the ability to simulate nature. And that means that we are going to be able, because it understands molecules and particles, which I don't, to a great degree, it's going to enable us to do things like build more effective batteries. It's going to allow us to have non-polluting plastics. So this is an area where we really need to be investing. And there's two things, Bernadette, I just want to say. Skills. We need to have skills around these technologies, because you bolt a technology onto an existing process, it doesn't actually make a huge difference. If we're going to be really positive about the changes we want to make, we need to invest. And that means skills across society. So it's not just people coming through university degrees. We have to keep working with the programs like the Business in the Community PTech program, so Pathways into Technology. IBM's an industry partner. That's where we're bringing these digital skills and these capabilities to kids who are in schools in underprivileged areas and giving them partnerships with industries, with companies who can really help them to develop their skills, get mentored, and hopefully actually get placements in companies like ours as they grow up in the system. And the other thing, just to mention government, because government is important, and I hear what Noel says, but they have been fantastic in terms of investing into the likes of the quantum ecosystem, where they are helping us to bring some PDocs, working with Trinity, working with UCD to make sure we have that ecosystem of skills. They've also spent some time out with our research unit in New York, and they are absolutely looking at technologies like quantum. But again, I'll make the same point. If we mess around in the periphery of things, that's the results we'll get. If Ireland wants to be a prominent player, then we really, really need to be ambitious in our agenda.
Yeah, and I think, again, refer back to the point you were making earlier in terms of we already have really important sectors in play here. To bring them, to lever the opportunities is really, really important. Stephen, to come back to that supply chain piece and how, you know, you're changing it. There's a lot of innovation you're bringing in, but can you speak to how that's actually been driven by factors such as, you know, the aging workforce, the construction, and the emissions from the process of building houses?
Absolutely. The construction industry is one of the most carbon intensive industries due to a number of factors, the materials we use and how we construct. I think the big agenda for us was, when we looked at our workforce, the scary thing was at the speed it was aging. The amount of young people weren't attracted into it. It isn't an industry that attracted young people over the last number of years, and to a degree that's been to the benefit of IT. If your friend worked in Google or IBM or wherever, you've seen them follow, and attracting them into the construction industry was a real challenge. So we kind of set about, you know, how do we do this sustainably, attracting people? And you know, we look at it, the average age of our workforce in construction is probably touching 45, 46 years of age, and construction is a manual industry, the wear and tear of working on construction sites. So we very much adapted to. Builders don't normally go into manufacturing, but we decided we were going to go to manufacturing, and we've looked at we've 3 factories on the go where we produce about 25 to 30% of our product under a roof in a sustainable manner. And what we're really trying to innovate is, you know, we're trying to look at the structure of what we're trying to produce and how can we use different materials. How can we use a more sustainable product? Like all our housing is timber frame housing. It's sustainable. It can be regrown, and that's a big thing. But this is a journey. It's a long way to go. I think that is phenomenal. I think what artificial intelligence will do for this will be eye-watering. It will just bring that speed of transition much quicker. What policymakers need to do, it's a bit. It can't be all stick, it has to be carrot as well. And I think the real thing is we've got to swap progress for perfection. And we're trying to, you know, we're trying to get to perfection, whereas what we really need to do is make really rapid progress. Maybe we don't get everything right, but get there faster is really and I think that is the ambition of industries. And I see it in ourselves and our teams. We really want to do this. And there's massive benefits. If you can make housing more affordable, you've solved an issue. If you can make it more sustainable, if you can reduce the carbon, you're ticking so many boxes. And again, I make the point, the person who's going to buy that product wants that. That's what they want into the future.
Yeah. And again, you know, from the work that we do with the business and the community, you know, feeling part of a community is you have a job and you have a roof over your head, and they're the fundamentals to having a fair society. Noel, the other fundamental of life is food, and food on our table. Can you speak to, I know you've been doing a lot of thinking internally in terms of the consumer and the supply chain for 2030. What kind of initiatives are you actually driving through? And obviously I know food waste is a critical issue at an individual level. So where are you going to try and nudge us when we walk into our super value?
Yeah. I mean, I think one of the interesting things about the consumer is most consumers want to do the right thing, but they need clues and cues when they go into a store. And it's very hard, actually, most consumers don't realise what's the right decision from a sustainability point of view. And we need to make it as easy to get them around the store as we do around special offers and values in terms of making the right choices. So that's the first thing we need to do. We need to help the consumer make the right choices. And the other thing we need to do, and I think it's incumbent upon the whole industry, is we have to make it so that making the right choice doesn't cost a premium to do it. And at the moment, that is the reality. You know, when you go into a store and you want to make the right choice, that product is typically more expensive than the one that, let's call it, isn't as sustainable. And I think we have to solve that problem as an industry, because the reality of it is the vast majority of consumers shop to a budget. And you can't eat principles, you know. I mean, most of the people in this room, you know, can go in and can make the right choice. But there's a huge population out there who work on a very tight budget. And when they go in, they're going to buy the product that they need. And even though they might want to do the right thing, they can't afford to do the right thing. And we have to level that playing field. There's an obligation on us. In terms of the supply chain, I mean, I'm interested in what Stephen just said. I mean, I have a sort of a philosophy that, you know, perfection is the enemy of progress. You know, and you know, if we look at policymakers at the moment, they're saying, look, you have to do this. So they're saying, for example, to food producers, you have to reduce your herd by half. Now, these people make a living, so effectively what they're saying is you have to just do away with half your income. And what am I going to do? Well, I don't know, but you can't do that anymore. So we've got to join the dots here in terms of saying, well, okay, maybe if you take away half your herd, we can replant your land and we can grow the product that's required to make HVO, which is probably the best kept secret in terms of transport emissions at the moment. A HVO, without getting into the detail, is a product called hydrotreated or hydrogenated vegetable oil, which goes straight into a diesel engine without any modification and reduces emissions by 90%. 90, right? So this is a silver bullet for transport emissions. The problem, it's controlled by the energy industry, and it's sold at its price is pegged to diesel, and it's sold at a premium. And bizarrely, when you have a commercial fleet, the government offer a rebate on diesel, but the rebate doesn't apply to HVO. Now that's where the policy is completely mixed up, and we've got to sit down and sort it. And we've got to then say to the energy industry, because I live in the real world, right? And if I'm working for an oil company, I know that, you know, how we make money. But these oil companies are going to have to pivot to say, well, how do we make biofuels and sustainable energy? And HVO, some people might argue, well, HVO could lead potentially to deforestation. Not necessarily, because most of it is manufactured from food product waste anyway. But it could also be a transitional step back to making progress, to moving to something like hydrogen or electricity. But for us to want to get straight to hydrogen or straight to electricity, it's just that technology just isn't there yet. Yeah. And we're disincentivized in terms of moving. We're moving half our fleet by 2030, we'll have half our fleet, 50% of our fleet on HVO, but it's going to cost us €8 million a year to do that on today's money.
Yeah. And I think, again, you know, when I listen to that is we are in a transition hump. The trade-offs are going to be really tough. To have the mature, honest dialogue about, okay, you're going to lose, but we can get this intervention in place to help you. You know, those pain points have to be named and owned, and keeping focus on the solution of it, I think is...
Look, we need to do less talking and more doing, right? I mean, the reality of it is, you know, you could go to any event like this across the world at the moment, and everybody's talking, but not enough people are doing. And we're running out of road, you know, and when eventually, you know, I'm sure you heard on the news this morning, 2023 is now officially the hottest year on record on the planet. This is real. Yeah. And unfortunately, unlike COVID, there isn't going to be a vaccine. There isn't going to be a solution. Once the damage is done, it's done. Yeah. And we will, ironically, deny our children. Like, you know, we all, I'm sure you know, we spend our lives, you know, trying to pass something better on to our children. And won't it be the ultimate irony if we deny them the very thing that they'll need to enjoy it, and that's a planet to live on?
Yeah. Deborah, people, dare I say, like your employees, are happy to follow if someone is brave enough to actually make that step.
Of course, respect for the environment is part of our culture, but I think despite global sort of setting the direction for us, from a local point of view, there's absolutely lots that we can do, and it does have a huge impact, because really our businesses are dependent on our ability to acquire and to retain talent. So, you know, listening to Ruth talking about all this great talent coming up, how do we actually attract that? So, you know, we've done lots of stuff. We've built community gardens, we've planted trees up on our technology campus, we've got polytunnels, we've got beekeeping, you know, we have LED lighting, free cooling, and we do all the right things. But I think two things struck me in the last year, the changes that we made. So obviously we came back from COVID into a hybrid working pattern. We built our technology campus back in the 90s. It was first of a kind. It was built for manufacturing because that's what we were doing at the time. So you can imagine the amount of energy that goes into heating and cooling a plant like that. Now rock on 20 years later, and actually we're into higher value added services. This doesn't make sense in terms of the sustainability goals that we set ourselves. So we started mothballing buildings at the beginning of the year, and then we introduced things like Low Carbon Friday, so that people coming into the office on Fridays only had to go into particular parts of the building, and the employees loved this because this is what they wanted to see us do. But then we made an even bigger decision, and we said, you know what, this campus isn't purpose fit for us anymore, we need to sell it. So we've taken our campus onto the market, and you can imagine there's, you know, over 1,000 people who have built their homes around the campus because they've worked in IBM a long time. And here we are saying, actually, we're potentially going to move, hopefully staying on site, but we may have to move as well. What was interesting for me is when you sit down with your employees and you say, these are the decisions we're taking, and we're doing it for two reasons largely. One, because this isn't what we're saying to the market, to our clients around sustainability. We're not following our own mission here. And the second thing is, you're talking to us in the way that you're coming back to work, and I think we all probably recognise the bell curve. It doesn't make sense to be spending all this money, right, lighting and heating these buildings. And when we explained that, it was, I was really staggered by the response. Once they got over the initial shock, they came back and said, thank you for being so brave. Thank you for taking those decisions. And the second thing that really struck me in the last year was we run an annual engagement survey, as I suppose many companies do. And there was lots of great feedback, but the area for improvement for us coming from our employees was, you need to do more in the community. We want to see IBM do more. And so I got the senior leadership team together and said, we need to do something here. So we look at all of our business goals. We of course look at diversity and inclusion and our talent. But what are we going to do about this community? So we pulled together a pillar and we started focusing on how do we bring more skills into the community? How do we do more about sustainability? How do we do more volunteering? And 1 year later, the amount of folks in IBM Ireland who are leaning in on helping us take skills out into the environment and into the communities has exponentially grown. And when it comes to volunteering and the work that we're doing with charities, and people do all of this, of course, because they are volunteers, when you look at the IBM population across the world, Ireland ranks third behind only the USA and Canada in terms of what we're doing in that space. So I think it's been really rewarding for me to sit back sometimes and listen to what the employees are saying to us is important from a societal perspective, but also how we deliver against what we say we're going to do in sustainability. So that's been really, really interesting.
Thank you. In terms of staying the course, and to move into the final few 2 minutes of our discussion, so Stephen, for yourself, how are you going to stay the course over the next while? What will be your not for moving on sentiments over the next 2 or 3 years?
It's a tough one. I think Pat summed it up really well. Leadership or CEOs have a responsibility. It's not a gift they have, it's a responsibility. We've got to leave this world in a better place for the next generation. I look at my kids and I kind of say, what are we going to leave them, and can we take action quick enough now? So I do think we have a responsibility. I do think we are going the right way. Are we going the right way about it is the key issue, and I think that's the challenge. I think companies, particularly in wherever they're located, have a responsibility. Politicians don't have all the answers. And I think sometimes what we've got to do is, we can criticise them, and it's easy to criticise a politician. I've done it plenty of times myself. I wouldn't do their job for love nor money. But we also have a responsibility to show them the path. What can you do? And to Noel's point earlier on about, HVO, here's a quick transition plan. I think that's where we really have the responsibility. I think the key is, though, what I would say is, we've got to bring the people with us. Yeah. The fear is we have elections coming up in the next number of years, be it local or be it national. And the challenge is, do people run and say, to crush the green agenda? Whereas we have a responsibility to educate. And I think that's the big thing about, and the ways I look upon it is, if you can tell any person, I can reduce your utility costs from 300 a month to 200 a month. I can make your 100 euros of diesel that you put into your car 25 euros of ESB or electricity. I can make your food more sustainable. That's the ways we've got to pitch it, to bring people with us. But there has to be a carrot stick effect. It can't be all just one way. Yeah,
and a clear vision. And Deborah, and I know we're critical on time, in terms of what are you shining a light on in terms of your own leadership imperatives?
Well, look, I mean, just really quickly, we all of us have different conflicting sometimes goals, from a stakeholder community. Of course, we have shareholders, right, who expect us to deliver huge results, and then we've got all of these other priority for us as well. So I guess the key thing really is we have to maintain that balance. We can't lose sight of the other goals who may not be the most popular goals at that particular time, particularly when we're under this execution pressure. So I think that's really important. I think listening, being very clear about the reasons why we're making the decisions, because sometimes as business leaders we make tough decisions. I think we need to be clear to all the people working around us, why are we making those decisions and what does that mean for them? I'm a great lover of surveys, so I'll just finish on one because I started with one. We went out and spoke to a load of CEOs around their views on generative AI and were they ready for it. And we talked a lot about skills because 87% of CEOs believe that they will upskill 40% of their workforce in the next 2 to 3 years. And so we had that conversation, and they looked at skills, and actually STEM skills, of course, will continue to be really, really important for all the people coming up through the pipeline. But what they're really focusing on in the future is around time management, priorities, communication, clarity, and the most important attribute in a leader will be creativity.
No, the final word with you.
The last word.
Yeah.
In 2 minutes or
No
less.
pressure.
Yeah. Look, I agree a lot with what Stephen has said. I think the reality of it is that leadership is a privilege, and we have a responsibility to lead in a responsible way. And why do we have businesses at all? I mean, Pat, I think, mentioned this morning. You know, we have businesses because obviously we want them to be commercially successful, but we also want them to be a better society, to be able to contribute to a better society. So I think that we need to continue to work hard as a business community with politicians, not against politicians, and work also with giving people alternatives, because what's happening at the moment is you're seeing a sort of an urban-rural divide where, you know, people who live in rural Ireland, and I can tell you I'm from rural Ireland, don't understand some of the policies that they're being asked to follow because they're not being given viable alternatives.
Yeah.
So this is back to the carrot and stick thing. I just want to say one thing though that I think is, you know, we've spoken a lot, Ruth spoke about it this morning as well. Ireland is an extraordinary country, and actually I'm a great believer. I think people are extraordinary creatures. You know, everything that we see around us was invented by a person or developed by a person. And we can solve any problem that's put to us. And in Ireland in particular, when we get the bit between our teeth, we manage to solve the problem. So I think, you know, and some people have said to me, well, what's the point? Like, they're building coal-fired generators in China and India and everything else. And I think it was the Dalai Lama that famously said, you know, if you think you're too small to make a difference, then you never spent a night in a hotel room with a mosquito, you know. So, you know, I think we have led the way here before. Look at ban smoking in the workplace. Everybody thought we were nuts. It's now a global policy. Look at plastic bags, disposable plastic bags. We can lead here, but we just need to do it together.
And on that, thank you very much. Round of applause for our panel.